Hi BookTube, it's Amy. We're reading once again from Robert Louis Stevenson's travelogue, An Inland Voyage, in my 1908 illustrated edition. We are on page 188 with a section titled Précey and the Marionettes. We made Précey about sundown. The plain is rich with tufts of poplar. In a wide, luminous curve, the Oise lay under the hillside. A faint mist began to rise and confound the different distances together. There was not a sound audible but that of the sheep bells in some meadows by the river, and the creaking of a cart down the long road that descends the hill. The villas in their gardens, the shops along the street, all seemed to have been deserted the day before, and I felt inclined to walk discreetly as one feels in a silent forest. All of a sudden we came round a corner, and there, in a little green round the church, was a bevy of girls in Parisian costumes playing croquet. Their laughter and the hollow sound of the ball and mallet made a cheery stir in the neighborhood, and the look of these slim figures, all corseted and ribboned, produced an answerable disturbance in our hearts. And here is a sketch of the bridge between Creole and Précey. So there's that. We were within sniff of Paris, it seemed, and here were females of our own species playing croquet, just as if Précey had been a place in real life instead of a stage in the fairyland of travel. For to be frank, the peasant woman is scarcely to be counted as a woman at all, and after having passed by such a succession of people in petticoats, digging and hoeing and making dinner, this company of coquettes under arms made quite a surprising feature in the landscape, and convinced us at once of being fallible males. The inn at Précey is the worst inn in France. Not even in Scotland have I found worse fare. It was kept by a brother and sister, neither of whom was out of their teens. The sister, so to speak, prepared a meal for us, and the brother, who had been tippling, came in and brought with him a tipsy butcher to entertain us as we ate. We found pieces of lukewarm pork among the salad, and pieces of unknown yielding substance in the ragout. The butcher entertained us with pictures of Parisian life, with which he professed himself well acquainted. The brother, sitting the while on the edge of the billiard table, toppling precariously and sucking the stump of a cigar. In the midst of these diversions, bang went a drum past the house, and a hoarse voice began issuing a proclamation. It was a man with marionettes announcing a performance for that evening. He had set up his caravan and lighted his candles on another part of the girls' croquet green, under one of those open sheds which are so common in France to shelter markets. And he and his wife, by the time we strolled up there, were trying to keep order with the audience. It was the most absurd contention. The show people had set out a certain number of benches, and all who sat upon them were to pay a couple of sous for the accommodation. They were always quite full, a bumper house, as long as nothing was going forward, but let the show woman appear with an eye to a collection, and at the first rattle of her tambourine, the audience slipped off the seats and stood round on the outside with their hands in their pockets. It certainly would have tried an angel's temper. The showman roared from the proscenium. He had been all over France, and nowhere, not even on the borders of Germany, had he met with such misconduct, such thieves and rogues and rascals, as he called them. And every now and again the wife issued on another round and added her shrill quota to the tirade. I remarked here, as elsewhere, how far more copious is the female mind in the material of insult. The audience laughed in high good humor over the man's declamations, but they bridled and cried aloud under the woman's pungent sallies. She picked out the sore points. She had the honor of the village at her mercy. Voices answered her angrily out of the crowd, and received a smarting retort for their trouble. A couple of old ladies beside me, who had duly paid for their seats, waxed very red and indignant, and discoursed to each other audibly about the impudence of these mountebanks. But as soon as the show woman caught a whisper of this, she was down upon them with a swoop. If mesdames could persuade their neighbors to act with common honesty, The mountebanks, she assured them, would be polite enough. Mesdames had probably had their bowl of soup, and perhaps a glass of wine that evening. The mountebanks also had a taste for soup, and did not choose to have their little earnings stolen from them before their eyes. Once things came as far as a brief personal encounter between the showman and some lads, in which the former went down as readily as one of his own marionettes, to a peal of jeering laughter. I was a good deal astonished at this scene, because I am pretty well acquainted with the ways of French strollers, more or less artistic, and have always found them singularly pleasing. Any stroller must be dear to the right-thinking heart. If it were only as a living protest against the offices and the mercantile spirit, and as something to remind us that life is not by necessity the kind of thing we generally make it. Even a German band, if you see it leaving town in the early morning for a campaign in country places among trees and meadows, has a romantic flavor for the imagination. There is nobody under 30, so dead but his heart will stir a little at the sight of a gypsy's camp. We are not cotton spinners all, or at least not all through. There is some life in humanity yet, and youth will now and again find a brave word to say in dispraise of riches, and throw up a situation to go strolling with a knapsack. An Englishman has always special facilities for intercourse with French gymnasts, for England is the natural home of gymnasts. This or that fellow in his tights and spangles is sure to know a word or two of English, to have drunk English half and half, and perhaps performed in an English music hall. He is a countryman of mine by profession. He leaps, like the Belgian boating men, to the notion that I must be an athlete myself. But the gymnast is not my favorite. He has little or no tincture of the artist in his composition. His soul is small and pedestrian for the most part, since his profession makes no call upon it and does not accustom him to high ideas. But if a man is only so much of an actor that he can stumble through a farce, he is made free of a new order of thoughts. He has something else to think about besides the money box. He has a pride of his own, and what is of far more importance, he has an aim before him that he can never quite attain. He has gone upon a pilgrimage that will last him his life long, because there is no end to it short of perfection. He will better upon himself a little day by day, or even if he has given up the attempt, he will always remember that once upon a time he had conceived this high ideal, that once upon a time he had fallen in love with a star. 'Tis better to have loved and lost, although the moon should have nothing to say to Endymion, although he would or should settle down with Audrey and feed the pigs. Do you not think he would move with a better grace and cherish higher thoughts to the end? The louts he meets at church never had a fancy above Audrey's snood, but there is a reminiscence in Endymion's heart that, like a spice, keeps it fresh and haughty. To be even one of the outskirters of art leaves a fine stamp on a man's countenance. I remember once dining with a party in the inn at Chateau Landon. Most of them were unmistakable bagmen, others well-to-do peasantry, but there was one young fellow in a blouse whose face stood out from among the rest surprisingly. It looked more finished, more of the spirit looked out through it. It had a living, expressive air, and you could see that his eyes took things in. My companion and I wondered greatly who and what he could be. It was the fair time in Chateau Landon, and when he went along to the booths, we had our questions answered. For there was our friend, busily fiddling for the peasants to caper to. He was a wandering violinist. A troop of strollers once came to the inn where I was staying in the department of Seine-et-Marne. There was a father and mother, 2 daughters, brazen, blousy hussies who sang and acted without an idea of how to set about either, and a dark young man like a tutor, a recalcitrant house painter who sang and acted not amiss. The mother was the genius of the party, so far as genius can be spoken of with regard to such a pack of incompetent humbugs, and her husband could not find words to express his admiration for her comic countryman. "You should see my old woman," said he, and nodded his beery countenance. One night they performed in the stable yard with flaring lamps, a wretched exhibition, coldly looked upon by a village audience. Next night, as soon as the lamps were lighted, There came a plump of rain, and they had to sweep away their baggage as fast as possible and make off to the barn where they harbored, cold, wet, and supperless. In the morning, a dear friend of mine, who has a warm heart for strollers, as I have myself, made a little collection and sent it by my hands to comfort them for their disappointment. I gave it to the father. He thanked me cordially, and we drank a cup together in the kitchen, talking of roads and audiences and hard times. When I was going, up got my old stroller, and off went with his hat. "I'm afraid," said he, "that monsieur will think me altogether a beggar. But I have another demand to make upon him." I began to hate him on the spot. "We play again tonight," he went on. "Of course I shall refuse to accept any more money from monsieur and his friends, who have already been so liberal, but our program of tonight is something truly creditable, and I cling to the idea that monsieur will honor us with his presence." And then, with a shrug and a smile, "Monsieur understands the vanity of an artist." Save the mark, the vanity of an artist. That is the kind of thing that reconciles me to life. A ragged, tippling, incompetent old rogue, with the manners of a gentleman and the vanity of an artist to keep up his self-respect. But the man after my own heart is Monsieur de Vauversin. It is nearly 2 years since I saw him first, and indeed I hope I may see him often again. Here is his first program as I found it on the breakfast table, and have kept it ever since as a relic of bright days. Mesdames et Messieurs, Madame Ferrario et Monsieur de Vauversin auront l'honneur de chanter ce soir les morceaux suivants. Mademoiselle Ferrario, chanteur, mignon, oiseau, léger, France, des Français dorment, là, le château bleu, où voulez-vous aller? And I apologize, this isn't all in French here. Monsieur de Vauversin, Madame Fontaine et Monsieur Robnet, les plongeurs à cheval, le mari mécontent, tais-toi, gamine, mon voisin, l'original, héros, comme ça, comme on est trompé. And I speak extremely poor French, so I apologize for that. But there is no English translation of that program, so make of that what you will. They made a stage at one end of the salle à manger, and what a sight it was to see Monsieur de Vauversin with a cigarette in his mouth, twanging a guitar, and following Mademoiselle Ferrario's eyes with the obedient, kindly look of a dog. The entertainment wound up with a tombola, or auction of lottery tickets, an admirable amusement with all excitement of gambling, and no hope of gain, to make you ashamed of your eagerness, for there all is loss. You make haste to be out of pocket. It is a competition who shall lose most money for the benefit of Monsieur de Vauversin and Mademoiselle Ferrario. Monsieur de Vauversin is a small man with a great head of black hair, a vivacious and engaging air, and a smile that would be delightful if he had better teeth. He was once an actor in the Châtelet, but he contracted a nervous affection from the heat and glare of the footlights, which unfitted him for the stage. At this crisis, Mademoiselle Ferrario, otherwise Mademoiselle Rita of the Alcazar, agreed to share his wandering fortunes. "I could never forget the generosity of that lady," said he. "He wears trousers so tight that it has long been a problem to all who knew him how he manages to get in and out of them. He sketches a little in watercolors. He writes verses. He is the most patient of fishermen, and spent long days at the bottom of the inn garden, fruitlessly dabbling a line in the clean river. You should hear him recounting his experiences over a bottle of wine. Such a pleasant vein of talk as he has, with a ready smile at his own mishaps, and every now and then a sudden gravity, like a man who should hear the surf roar while he was telling the perils of the deep. For it was no longer ago than last night, perhaps, that the receipts only amounted to 1.5 francs, to cover 3 francs of railway fare and 2 of board and lodging. The Mary of a man worth $1,000,000 of money sat in the front seat, repeatedly applauding Madame Ferrario, and yet gave no more than 3 sous the whole evening. Local authorities look with such an evil eye upon the strolling artist. Alas, I know it well, who have been myself taken for one, and piteously incarcerated on the strength of the misapprehension. Once, Monsieur de Vauversin visited a commissary of police for permission to sing. The commissary, who was smoking at his ease, politely doffed his hat upon the singer's entrance. "Mr. Commissary," he began, "I am an artist." And on went the commissary's hat again. No courtesy for the companions of Apollo. "They are as degraded as that," said Monsieur de Vauversin, with a sweep of his cigarette. But what pleased me most was one outbreak of his, when he had been talking all the evening of the rubs, indignities, and pinchings of his wandering life. Someone said it would be better to have $1,000,000 of money down, and Mademoiselle Ferrario admitted that she would prefer that mightily. "Eh bien, moi non, not I," cried de Vauversin, striking the table with his hand. "If anyone is a failure in the world, is it not I? I had an art in which I had done things well as some, perhaps better than others, and now it is closed against me. I must go about the country, gathering coppers and singing nonsense. Do you think I regret my life? Do you think I would rather be a fat burgress like a calf? Not I. I have had moments when I have been applauded on the boards. I think nothing of that, but I have known in my own mind sometimes, when I had not a clap from the whole house, that I had found a true intonation or an exact and speaking gesture. And then, messieurs, I have known what pleasure was, what it was to do a thing well, what it was to be an artist, and to know what art is to have an interest forever, such as no burgress can find in his petty concerns. Tenez, messieurs, je vais vous le dire, it is like a religion." Such, making some allowance for the tricks of memory and the inaccuracies of translation, was the profession of faith of Monsieur de Vauversin. I have given him his own name, lest any other wanderer should come across him with his guitar and cigarette and Mademoiselle Ferrario. For should not all the world delight to honor this unfortunate and loyal follower of the Muses? May Apollo send him rhymes hitherto undreamed of. May the river be no longer scanty of her silver fishes to his lure. May the cold not pinch him on long winter rides, nor the village jack in office affront him with unseemly manners. And may he never miss Mademoiselle Ferrario from his side, to follow with his dutiful eyes and accompany on the guitar. The Marionettes made a very dismal entertainment. They performed a piece called Pyramus and Thisbe in 5 mortal acts, and all written in Alexandrians fully as long as the performers. One marionette was the king, another the wicked counselor, a third, credited with exceptional beauty, represented Thisbe, and then there were guards and obdurate fathers and walking gentlemen. Nothing particular took place during the 2 or 3 acts that I sat out, but you will be pleased to learn that the unities were properly respected, and the whole piece, with one exception, moved in harmony with classical rules. That exception was the comic countryman, a lean marionette in wooden shoes, who spoke in prose and in a broad patois, much appreciated by the audience. He took unconstitutional liberties with the person of his sovereign, kicked his fellow marionettes in the mouth with his wooden shoes, and whenever none of the versifying suitors were about, made love to Thisbe on his own account in comic prose. This fellow's evolutions, and the little prologue in which the showman made a humorous eulogium of his troops, praising their indifference to applause and hisses and their single devotion to their art, were the only circumstances in the whole affair that you could fancy would so much as raise a smile. But the villagers of Précey seemed delighted. Indeed, so long as a thing is an exhibition, and you pay to see it, it is nearly certain to amuse. If we were charged so much a head for sunsets, or if God sent round a drum before the hawthorns came in flower, what a work should we not make about their beauty? But these things, like good companions, stupid people ye early cease to observe, and the abstract bagman titups past in his spring gig and is positively not aware of the flowers along the lane or the scenery of the weather overhead. And that is the end of that section. And I found it very interesting several years ago to read about these puppet and marionette shows for the first time. My understanding is that for a good part of a couple of centuries, up into the mid 20th century too, I recall reading about them in some of Simone de Beauvoir's memoirs. Puppet and marionette shows were, entertainment for the common person. We would think nowadays of puppet shows as being just for children, but in fact it was an art form for adults. So I think it's fascinating to read about Stevenson's take on one particular marionette show that he observed.